My guest today was elected as a councillor to Wilmot Township in 2018. At the time, she was one of 3 women to get elected to Wilmot Township Council of 6, the first woman on that council since 1974. In 2022, she decided to throw her hat in the ring for mayor of Wilmot Township, but was defeated. Despite her municipal commitments and extensive responsibilities with her family's organic farming operation, she has been actively involved in various farm organizations, including the National Farmers Union, where she is currently its president. She is a passionate advocate for food justice, healthy living, and environmental stewardship. I'm pleased to welcome Jenn Pfenning to the Old Grey Mayors podcast. Hi, Jenn.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you very much for being part of our podcast. As you know, I've had an opportunity to do a podcast with Cheryl and Angie, and so it's kind of nice for me to be able to, get the triumvirate and close that off by having you on. So thank you very much for making yourself available. I know you've got a lot of stuff going on. Just wanted to touch base first and start. Maybe give us a little bit of your background in terms of your, education and some of the work you were doing prior to municipal politics. I know that's a handful, but
Yeah, well, I've been working on the farm actively since I left being a nurse's aide back in the day. When I was pregnant with my third, I did the math and realized that I'd be paying somebody more than I was getting paid
Gotcha.
to look after 3 kids. So quit that and stayed on the farm full time and raised the kids.
Nice.
And as I worked on the farm, there's always policy that goes along with that. And I've always been somebody who's politically engaged and active, have not missed voting at a single election. And so I naturally tended to get involved with organizations. That led to my being on the board of directors for Food Share for 7 years, Waterloo Region Food System Roundtable, National Farmers Union Local, the Organic Council of Ontario. I was president for a couple of years, and I was on the board for a couple of years before that. So yeah, a lot of diversity of various, mostly food-related and agriculture-related work and advocacy outside of the farm.
That's very interesting because I was just thinking I have a few clients on the law side who are farmers and have been injured in accidents or what have you, and we get talking about some of the things that they do, and several of them talk about their board or national board participation. So it just sort of dawned on me that that's probably a pretty significant thing that we don't realize as we're driving along the country road and seeing these idyllic farms sitting there, that there's a whole greater world of networking going on amongst the farming community nationwide.
Absolutely. There are a lot of regulations and legal frameworks that impact how we farm wherever we're farming, different ways and different specifics for whichever kinds of crops you're growing and what type of farming you're doing. But that it's really important for us to have these organizations that can speak to government about how the policies are formed, how the regulations are formed. These regulation frameworks really have a big impact on how well we can do what we do. And supportive policies, good regulation is excellent.
Right. Well,
bad regulation is terrible.
Yeah. It's sort of reminded me of this old stat somebody had. I don't know the exact number, but at one time, if you looked at federal government in terms of the MPs and what their occupations were before they became MPs or while they're MPs, and there was a time where farming was the number one occupation. I think the next one after that was lawyering, but farming was the number one occupation of a large number of people that were members of parliament. So it's interesting. So there's always that political activism element to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the National Farmers Union, we have our very first president was elected as an MP also,
Oh, really?
and we've had,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So,
He was
who
a
was that?
character.
Who
Wow.
was that?
Oh gosh, now I can't say his name. Maybe we'll leave that piece out because
Okay, yeah,
I
yeah,
can't.
no problem. I was just
Roy
curious.
Atkinson. That's it. Roy Atkinson.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure,
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
He was a
He.
conservative member of parliament.
I don't know what
What
party he was
province?
with.
What province?
Saskatchewan.
Yeah, good chance. Yeah,
Yeah,
NDP or conservative, one or the other.
yeah. I think he might have been NDP,
Maybe NDP.
but
Yeah, interesting.
it isn't. I mean, we try to stay out of the
Yeah,
partisanship,
no, no,
right?
I
As
understand.
an
I was just
organization,
curious.
and
Yeah, I was just curious.
yeah, no, and it hasn't come up for me in conversation.
So when did you come to Wilmot then, to New Hamburg?
I moved. My family moved to this area, so to Tavistock when I was 16. And I got married pretty young and moved in on the farm here 31 years ago.
Okay, all right. Was your
So,
is your husband have a farming background as well?
so yeah, I mean, Pfenning is my married name.
Yes.
And I recently, was thinking about how many generations of farming, and the Pfenning family has been farming. We have the old family Bible from Germany still, because they immigrated here in 1981, and they've been farming for over 400 years.
Wow. 400
And
years.
that's
Ooh.
recorded in the Bible, the all of the births, deaths, marriages, etc. And when my husband and I got married, our marriage was entered into that Bible. When our children were born, they were entered into that Bible record.
So if your children had those those class projects where you're trying to do your family tree, they they had the source of information.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And on my side, growing up, my dad has a PhD in horticulture. I spent
Oh,
the minute I could walk, I was walking around greenhouses and suckering tomatoes, and
wow.
playing with a dibble, learning to transplant tomatoes and extricate the little, small hands are good for pulling apart tomato plants
Okay.
when they.
That's what your dad told you. So okay, so where did you grow up then? You didn't grow up in in the New Hamburg area. You grew up.
Oh, that'd be a whole podcast by
Oh,
itself.
okay, all right, that's fine then, no problem.
It's a really long story. I've moved around a lot.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So around 93, then you came to the Wilmot area. Is that about right?
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So while you're involved with those various organizations, you ended up running for council in 2020,
2018.
2018, yes, sorry, 2018.
Mhm.
I've lost track. I was trying to put it in perspective of my own timing. So 2018. What were you doing? Were there some things you were doing locally prior to 2018 in the Wilmot area that sort of got you interested in local municipal politics?
I had volunteered for various events, one off, just help out as part of the community, but I wasn't. And I mean, I'm a member of the Wilmot Horticultural Society, but I wasn't on any boards or specifically engaged with a single organization. Just helped out wherever I saw something that I could do to be helpful within the community. Um, and that kind of was part of when I looked at what I wanted to do, where I wanted to spend my energy next, as in terms of volunteering. And I started looking to, what can I do locally?
Right. Yeah, and often on these podcasts, we get stories from people who will say, "Yeah, I was working in the community, or I might have been part of a neighborhood association or something like that." And then people, and then you'll say, "Well, how did you think about running?" And they'll say, "Well, people asked me to run or to consider running." Was that sort of that part of it sort of similar to your story?
Yeah, I honestly never had any personal aspirations of running for any kind of elected office. I'm not super fond of public speaking. I've had to learn to get over it. And yeah, so public office was not really something that I kind of had at the top of any lists I had. But a lot of people asked me to run because they had seen, advocacy that I'd done on various projects or various issues in agriculture. And of course, knowing, what I do on the farm, and that, running a farm, you have a lot of financial infrastructure, all of that kind of work. And people saw that and said, you'd be really good. And having heard me speak a few times, and
Publicly speaking?
yeah.
Before we get into the campaigning and stuff like that, you mentioned, advocacy on some issues, farming issues. And I just wanted to touch on this for you before we moved on. But the migrant labor rights, and maybe you could just talk about your work in that area for a moment, because I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah, so it's something that through everything else, once I started engaging with that, I recognized that my specific voice is unique because there aren't any other employers advocating for migrant worker rights. Not visibly anyways, people agree, and support my position or, things that I've stated, but there isn't anyone else speaking to government or media about it in the way that I am. So when we started hiring temporary foreign workers on the seasonal agricultural worker program in 2005, the first thing was, wow, it's really great. We get to hang out with some really cool people and work together. And it was just a really positive experience personally. By the end of that season, started to recognize that there were problems with experiences they'd had on other farms and long evolution of, learning and growing and understanding. I've come to understand that the whole program is flawed from its foundation. And so that's formed the basis for my advocacy. We as a country view ourselves as being a just and equitable society,
Right.
And yet we have this program that is structurally unjust,
Right.
And creates vulnerabilities for people.
For the migrant workers, the vulnerabilities for the migrant workers. Right.
Yeah.
So as you're working on that advocacy, you're probably being brought into the realm of provincial and federal politics then through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you ended up landing on running municipally. Had you thought about the different levels of government as different options at one point or another?
Well, I mean, aside from not really thinking about running for politics at all, I was asked to run both provincially and federally by more than one party. But I don't. Partisanship and the increasingly toxic partisanship that we see is something that I just have no interest in engaging with.
Yeah.
I have friends that are very dear to me who are members of all across the spectrum
Right.
of political parties. And, I think that we really, we need to see more respect and cooperation between parties.
Yeah.
So, no, did not. I
hear you. It's watching all the bashing that goes on, and attempts to make political points sometimes seems to be just stretching it just for the point of trying to beat on somebody, and it is frustrating and tiresome to have to watch. So, but you found municipal politics, or your thought was municipal politics would not be that.
Yeah, I thought it, with the partisanship sort of, mostly off the table, it has the opportunity to be a lot more personal and
Civil.
connected to community. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it does have that opportunity. I mean, look, anytime you're going to have two or more people in the room debating or discussing something, you're going to have difference of opinion that can lead to maybe some uh, consternation amongst the people. But I just find when you take the badges off, like liberal, conservative, NDP, whatever, just get rid of that stuff. It makes it a whole lot easier to interact with each other, because you're not
Yeah.
sort of bound by, well, you're a liberal, you should be this part of the spectrum, or you're a conservative, you should be this right side of the spectrum, and et cetera, et cetera. You can vote on things where one might say, wow, that's very liberal, or vote on things, wow, that's very conservative. It's just like that's how you feel based on your experiences coming to it. So you were living in New Hamburg, correct? You live on the farm or in New Hamburg, or the farm is in New Hamburg, or in the ward that you ran in? I wasn't sure.
I live on my farm right in the middle of it.
Okay.
And it is in Ward 4,
Okay.
which encompasses all of New Hamburg and some of the surrounding farming
Okay.
properties, of course.
Okay. Interesting. Because in North Dumfries, it was Ayr is the major populace, but there was no, like, the farms were all separate wards from the
Mm.
whatever the boundaries of Ayr would be, for example. So when you decided to run, then, so was there something that sort of pushed you over that deciding line to say, yes, I'm going for it, or just a general discussion with friends and family?
A whole lot of people who were in a much wider circle than my hanging out at each other's houses kind of level of friendship
Right.
asked me to run. And one particular individual ended up being the clincher that pushed me.
Okay.
And it was because I had taken a hiatus from being on any boards or anything to be able to care for my mother-in-law when she developed Alzheimer's. And so with her then in a home, I took some time to sort of regroup after that, and then was looking around to see what I would do, where I would invest my energy, and really was looking to focus it in our community more directly. And yeah, decided to run for municipal politics.
So
The reason I decided to
yeah,
run,
that's what I was going to ask you.
I feel like I have a set of skills and knowledge that suits the requirements of the job well. I understand policy. I understand the way that government works. I am very familiar with, motions and resolutions and, Robert's rules,
Right.
with all the boards you've been on and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the processes of that are something that I'm very comfortable with, was very comfortable with before. And I understand and care about. Also, my husband went to school for civil engineering technology, so
Okay.
The infrastructure conversation is
Yeah.
really engaging a lot.
Yep.
But also as farmers, we're engaged with the infrastructure on our farms all the time. From equipment to sewers
Yep.
or
Ditches.
ditches, drainage,
Yep.
and all of the things that in bigger scale make up a community's infrastructure needs.
Right.
So again, understanding all of that, I felt like, you know what, I have something to offer. And so my running for council, I wasn't particularly attached to the outcome of the election, if that makes any sense. The campaign was about offering my service to the community.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying, like, look, hey, community, some of you have asked me, and I've thought about it, and I think I can make a contribution. Here's what I can do. Here's my skill set. If you're interested in me providing that, then, vote for me. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you've got a whole bunch of other things to do too that you can still contribute to the community and to your family and on a national scene. So so when you ran in the ward, it was two people were elected to represent Ward 4, right? And it would be the
Mhm.
top two of however many candidates. And I believe there were four candidates in total,
Yeah.
and you were running against two incumbents. So you're up against, like, as if it's like a single person running against a single candidate who's an incumbent. Like you're up against that issue of incumbency, which is not easy to overcome in a campaign.
Yeah, it's I guess I didn't really think. I mean, I thought I had a chance of winning, of course,
Right.
or why bother
Sure,
engaging in it?
sure.
But I knew the odds were really not in my
Hmm.
favor, statistically speaking. Um, but I, it was. I went to Mark Murray, who was then sitting
He was one of,
a
he
sitting
yeah, he was
councillor.
an incumbent. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said to him, Mark, before I go file my papers, I want you to know that I'm doing it. And it's not because I think you're a terrible guy or you're doing a bad job. And I don't have any burning, pitchfork issue that I am championing. I love our community and I want to offer my service.
Yeah. And obviously some people, before you knew what the vote count was, but before that, when you're making this decision, some people wanted you to run, knowing there were two incumbents there, but they thought you brought some new perspective, no doubt.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things, like, I know we'll talk later about advice for anyone running, but when when you're on the doorstep and people are talking smack about the incumbents,
Oh,
I never engaged.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I
Just
gotcha.
offer empathy that that's their experience and move on to what am I
Yeah.
offering?
See,
Because it goes back to that negative, toxicity of,
yes.
of politics that
Yeah, you don't want
I
to
just
get
know.
drawn down into that. It's like they say, throw some mud, you
Yeah.
get dirt on you, and you want to take keep it on a high level. This is because you weren't running because of your distaste for the incumbents. You were running because you were offering your skills, and so that's what you want to talk about when you're out engaging with the people. Did you have a platform per se? Was there a formal platform or anything like that when you were running?
There were specific points that I talked about, like community spaces, active transportation routes, and trails development. Specifically, outdoor public spaces was something that I talked about a lot. I didn't have a fully, you know, point by point
Sure.
platform that I produced.
I mean, that's common because most people don't realize, like, they think, okay, an election campaign is an election campaign, but federally, provincially, they're spending all kinds of money. They have all kinds of staff. They develop these policies, right? When you're running, it's really just you and maybe a few friends and some family members that are really putting it all together. So you don't have this organized, unless you're. Some people are affiliated with parties that get more active in
Mhm.
municipal campaigns, certainly, but for the vast majority of people who are running, it's very much a solo effort.
Yeah. And it's really, and that's one of the, I guess, benefits of local politics is that it's really about what you're offering,
Yeah,
right? You don't have to engage in that trash talking. You can just talk about positive things for the community.
yeah.
And if people have questions about how are you going to deal with this, you can, talk about what your approach will be. You don't have to worry about, oh, wait, does that fit with party policy?
Right. I think you've mentioned trash talking a few times, but I think we should clarify. You did tell me that there was a certain collegiality amongst the candidates, and it was generally a positive amongst the four of you, or there was four of you running. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. In 2018, in Ward 4, there was, between the four of us, no negative talk about each
Right. Right.
other.
You got along as you were campaigning, and no one was throwing
Yeah.
any shade or dirt on anybody during that
Yeah.
campaign. Yeah. Um, One of the things you had mentioned you ran on was responsible fiscal management was a theme,
Yeah.
correct? But at the time, you weren't an incumbent, so you really did you have access to the financial documents, or you was there anything that you base that on?
Only what's publicly
Yeah,
available, which is a fair bit, but when you if you don't know the extent of certain things, or your numbers are numbers, right? And when you look at the things like no debt, and we had 13 million ish surplus in the bank
right.
reserve, basically.
Yes,
Um, those were the facts that I was aware of in terms of our position as a community. Um, and people talk to me, a large number of people talk to me about, oh, we have money in the bank. Why aren't we spending it? And my answer was, okay, so yes, we have a reserve fund, but we're legally required to have a reserve fund, and B, 13 million? Are you kidding me? That's nothing for the amount of infrastructure that we have in this community.
yes. I think a lot of people don't realize a couple of things. One, the size of your budget that you're dealing with. I mean, at the region,
Mhm.
it's a $1.7 billion annual budget, which blows my mind just to think about. But even at the township level, when you start to add up all the assets that you have, and the fact that those assets have to be replaced at some point, all your roads, all your buildings, it's a
Mhm.
significant amount of money. Where I think you'll tell me, like everywhere, there's not enough money set aside to do everything you need to do.
That's absolutely true. And I suspected that that was the case before I got in. Not that I was, going around pointing fingers at
Sure.
anybody about
Yeah.
it, but, you know, it is really the road repairs and sewer pipes and so on are not sexy
No.
topics, and they don't get you elected.
No.
Um, at least I don't. I can't see that they
They
do.
might. They,
I
they
talk
might.
to
They
them
might
like,
get you. They might get you defeated.
yeah, uh,
But okay. Well,
yeah,
let me ask you this though. Okay. Um, so we're sort of jumping ahead a bit, but just sort of on topic. Zero tax increases. Good thing or bad thing?
terrible thing.
Yeah.
Inflation is real.
Yes.
Let's face it. And every minute that goes by, our infrastructure is being impacted, and we're wearing out. So zero increases means zero capacity to maintain the infrastructure that we need to function as a community.
Yeah. I found that in North Dumfries, for a period of time, they relied on development charges or assessment growth, right? More assessment growth as getting by and not having to raise your taxes. But after a while, if you don't continue that level of development, that assessment growth can dry up, and now you're left with a tax
Mhm.
base that hasn't kept up, and
Yeah.
can lead to problems down the road. And we had 14 years of consecutive zero property tax increases, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And whether it's zero or minimal, if it's not sufficient
Hmm.
to keep up,
Yeah.
it's it's ultimately you're robbing the future.
And I think some places are coming to that realization today. We won't say where. Um, so let me ask you this now. So now you're elected, and tell me, election night, was that a bit of a shock, or
Yeah, I guess I mean, it felt pretty great. And it was I guess a little surprising. Um I didn't I had started to get indications from people um, that it probably was looking
oh,
good.
so
Now, how,
during the campaign, you started to get a feeling about it.
yeah,
Ah,
how other people guessed it, I don't know.
right, 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 right. Just a sense. People talk to people, and maybe names keep coming up. That sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I guess. And so I had a fairly strong indication that I was going to at least be close, if not just
Right.
a little bit
Right.
ahead.
And you came in
The
second?
margin by which I won was the surprising thing, to be honest.
Did you come in first or second?
I came in. Did I come in first?
Uh, I was just
It,
curious if you beat one or two incumbents in that race, but that's okay.
I
No
think
problem.
I think I might have
Uh,
beat both of them.
okay, wow. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So now there's like this new council, three new ladies, and three incumbent men. So what was that dynamic like?
Interesting.
Yeah.
uh, individually, there was no. We didn't, we've seen some really terrible examples of councils behaving extremely badly in this province, right?
Yeah.
So we know what that looks like. That was not Wilmot,
No, no,
not
no.
ever.
There weren't like code of conduct complaints against people or anything like that that you see in other places.
No, 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 really terrible hot mic moments. Um, and behind closed doors, it wasn't vitriolic and nasty like that either.
Nice, good.
Um, which really is good. We had our differences, but mostly we discussed them like adults. Um, there was never any name calling or swearing or
Yeah,
personal put downs. Um, and that's not to say that we all got along like best friends or anything either, but
well,
we were civil with each
yeah.
other.
I'm going to give you just a quick observation that I had when you talk about the evolution of the relationship between the two halves, we'll say, right? And so I'm sure the experienced half is kind of wondering, okay, here comes the new half. They're going to tell us how to do it, blah, 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 that sort of thing. But I think over time, while there might have been some resistance or friction, I observed the older crew coming on board with the thinking that the progressive thinking and progressive not in a negative connotation like some people want to use that term, but progressive positive way, coming on board with some of the thinking and the changes and accepting these changes. Now probably difficult, but when I think about the indigenous land acknowledgement, and I think about how the statues were ultimately removed by council. That was a group decision eventually, right? I mean, it reached that point, and
Yeah.
so I sort of saw. To me, I was surprised and pleasantly surprised with the evolution that I observed from the outside looking in. I had no personal knowledge of any of the stuff happening inside, and I'm sure that was a very difficult period of time. We'll sort of touch on that briefly, but I could see that. But tell me about um, how is staff? How is, like, because there's always that politician staff dynamic as well, and I'm not saying it's a negative thing or anything like that, but it's just a change because staff is there all the time. Politicians come and go. In a sense, I know staff can leave too, but there's a general view that staff's there generally for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and we, especially in 2018, we had a staff contingent that had been there a very, very, very long time. And there's it. I have the greatest empathy for political staff at every level of governance in this country. You look at any level, and when there's any kind of a shift in who's elected, boy, they all start to get a little twitchy because they don't know
They have to adapt.
what's going to happen
Right,
now,
right, right,
right? In a private organization, you very carefully manage onboarding of a new manager or high level staff person,
right,
right,
right.
into an existing team. This just happens.
Yeah,
And sometimes, there might be personal allegiances to the people who didn't make it.
Right.
And it gets really
That's
complicated.
a really good point. That's a really good point because you're sort of like you're working as a collective for 4 years, and now you take some people out of that and insert somebody new because that's how the people voted. So is a that's a sudden change because from the date of the election, now these new people are inaugurated within a couple of months, and that's the dynamic for the next 4 years. So, yeah, that is an interesting aspect that I'm just thinking about now. So, how did you find things?
It took some time to develop the relationships, and I would say that there were challenges with people not wanting to um, uh, not wanting to accept new ideas. Sometimes that's a human response, right?
Yep.
Um, and at the same time, an eagerness to be able to advance things that maybe staff had hoped to work on but hadn't had leadership um, provided for. And trails was one of those things, which of course was a natural fit for me because I'm an avid hiker and I love being outdoors
Yeah, let's
and
let's touch on that for a moment. So you was it created the Wilmot Trails Advisory Committee was created during your term?
yeah, that was so I brought two notices of motion forward within a couple months of being elected. Uh,
I'm chuckling because I know how it takes a while for people to get into this idea of bringing motions forward, but it's usually after a year or two.
well, like I said, I
I
had an
know, I
understanding of
know.
how these things
That,
work. So I was like,
that's why
okay,
I'm
all
chuckling.
right, if this isn't going to be on the agenda, I know how to get it
Yeah,
there.
yeah, that's scary for staff.
Um, you know what? We're laughing about it, but I think it really friggin' terrified the staff
It's
because they
yeah.
were like, uh-oh, we don't know what's going to come out of their mouths next.
Sometimes it's good to keep people guessing.
I tried to, talk to them and say, like, look, guys, I'm not here to,
Right.
make your life rough. I'm not here to say you're doing a bad job. I love this community. I've lived here a long time. I've raised my family here. And guess what? I think it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you're part of it.
Yeah. I think
So
yes. What you picked up
that's
on
the base I'm starting from.
Yeah, what you picked up on early is that as an elected official, I mean, you have legal authority to do things. You are the law, so to speak. And also at the municipal level, which I never realized until I became mayor and started doing things, was you have this opportunity to affect so much change at the ground level in your community. Obviously,
Mhm.
positive change is the goal, right? And you hope people perceive it as positive. But you can like where this building's going to go, where that arena is going to go, where this road's going to go, where these trails are going to go. So tell me some more about the Wilmot Trails Advisory Committee then, and the Baden Hills Trail project that you worked on.
Yeah, so I brought that pair of motions for the Trails Committee and for the Sustainability Working Group in March of 2019.
Hmm.
And it took, 6 or 8 months, I think, to actually get off the ground as a committee and get people appointed and so on. Um, and that might have been because not everybody was super keen about doing something new, um, but it was an incredibly wonderful experience working with community members that were appointed to the committee and staff. It was just phenomenal. And the sense of passion and engagement and care for community that we were able to have present in those meetings and in that room was just wonderful.
Well, you hit on
And
something that is powerful. I mean, trails. People don't realize it, but trails is a is a feature that many people are passionate about and really love to get involved with. Because when I was mayor in North Dumfries, I mentioned we had a Parks and Rec committee, which was turned out to be our most active committee that we created, and they came up with a trail master plan. So it's this whole sense of, tell us about this whole sense of being outdoors. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's about an ability to connect with community outside of organized events and things like organized sports. You know, when you're walking on a trail and you encounter other community members and you share, it's recognized scientifically that our brains need these micro interactions in social settings. And whether we have them in the grocery store or at various events and that, this offers a way for people to engage in being in nature, which we know has profound impacts for people's mental health and overall physical health, and in every way, a sense of community. Having those spaces and people being in them and interacting with each other and interacting with nature, there's literally no downside.
Yeah.
It is only enormous positive benefits to building community spirit and a feeling of connectedness within any given community.
And tell us how the Baden Hills Trail project came to fruition. What were the components? How did that come about? And that was through this committee, wasn't it?
It was. So before I was elected, Mike Scout, developer in the area, who's been successful, and he cares about the community. He had donated money to the township for trails, earmarked it $500,000 and then $500,000, so a total of $1 million for trails development. And they had not done anything with it before I got elected. So I was, very eager to make use of that wonderful generosity. But we wanted to, and this was, the whole committee, we really looked together at, we have a trails master plan that had been created, but hadn't really been able to be enacted or further developed in the way that we were able to within that committee. So we had a great start with that document, and then we started looking around. Okay, we have this money. If we try and buy land with it, it's going to eat up a lot of the money, and then we're not going to have any capacity to develop anything on the land. So what do we already own? And we hit on, and this was, with the advice of staff. Good relationship with staff and knowledgeable staff are really key to being successful in elected positions.
Yeah, it's a team effort for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're a part-time, because we have to remind people you're a part-time councillor.
Yeah, I think in my first year, I probably, if you added up the hours, didn't actually make minimum wage.
Well, that's what happens. Yes. It's a good point. I'm glad you said that, because that's so true. So true.
But it was a labor of love. And so the Baden Hills, the space where the actual trails are, is owned by the region. So it's this chunk of land that the region wasn't really doing anything with. There had been some projects 50 years ago or so, but they really weren't using it for anything at all. And local youth had hauled some various pieces of furniture up there.
Like couches?
Couches on the top of the hill. Yeah. That's dedication to your party spot.
They're future engineers, the way they figured to get it up there.
Yeah. So we identified that space, asked the region. They approved of the plan wholeheartedly. It was pretty simple. And then, successive putting all of the other pieces in place. There's also a strip of land. So it's on Sandhills Road. It's on the east side of Sandhills Road, north of the highway. So on the corner of Sandhills and the 7-8 highway is the township works yard,
Okay.
salt sheds, etc.
Yep.
And so we owned that piece and a chunk of land that wasn't being used, that had been acquired at some point, potentially for that works yard or a works yard expansion, and was de facto being farmed by the guy who had the land next to it.
Uh-huh.
I might not have made him very happy when I brought this project forward.
Oh, well.
Because he had to stop for. I mean, it's not a significant piece of
No.
his
No, no, no,
operation.
no.
So
But you put a bunch of pieces of land together, and you took the donation from Mike Scout, uh,
yep.
and that money was used for like laying the trail and I guess the material that would be used to make the trail, or what?
Yeah, so we put in, because the region was developing a multi-use trail along Gingrich Road. We thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if people could
Right.
walk, bike,
Connect. Right. Yeah.
whatever, connect without having to, have a section where they're traveling on the road.
Right.
And so we used that money to create a separated lane for traffic to the site.
Nice.
And it also paid for the gravel installation and posts to be put in to demarcate the edge of the property, so that people don't accidentally go wandering into private property. And the Stone Dust Trail, which forms a loop on the more level area of the property that is able to be accessed by people who might have
So
less
was
mobility.
the donation enough to build the infrastructure and sustain it over a period of time? Because there's always this issue about, yeah, we can build it like an arena, but we got to operate it. So what about that ongoing
Yeah.
cost? Because then that's that's on the tax, that's on the property taxes. Then if it's an ongoing operating issue, so how did it end up?
So there was money left at the end of that, and it went into other trails, smaller trails
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
projects, related projects. So we didn't use up the whole of it on that one
Yeah.
project. And the site was developed with the intention that it would not need significant financial investment to continue
Right.
to be maintained.
Good.
And so that, it's a stone dust trail. That's not a huge amount of money to maintain.
Right.
It's not that there's no maintenance cost. There is maintenance cost to
Sure.
everything.
But it depends on what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not huge. And the trails that we built on, like the sort of more intense hiking trails, those were all cut by volunteers. The committee is
Nice.
built,
Okay. Great.
and with timeline, we're talking. This was into 2020 when we weren't able to do anything else in terms of
COVID. Right.
right. So, but this was the perfect COVID project, because in the fall of 2020 we could be outside and safely distanced from each other and working together.
We all have this new timeline in our lives, pre-COVID, post-COVID. It's just like, even though we're still COVID, but I guess the other thing I just wanted to mention before we move on was that it must have been nice for the volunteers of this committee to have this concrete trail created, like something created from their efforts and from their work.
Oh, absolutely. It was just phenomenal. And everybody, we just felt so amazingly good about it. And I still, when I drive by on the highway, I'm always craning, peeking, seeing how many cars are in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, that's success, right?
Yeah. Now I just want to touch on for a moment this issue is like when you're running, you think about some things you want to do. When you're actually elected, and if you think about it after, you think, wow, there's all these things that occurred that you never even thought about when you were running. It's sort of like you just happen to be in that seat, and issues of the day arise out of virtually nowhere, and suddenly consume a large part of what you do. And certainly the path, the prime minister's path must have been a, like, how do you, what is your view of that period of time dealing with that issue? Like, what are your thoughts, just general thoughts about the time that you had to deal with that significant matter for the township during that period of time?
It was really tough. A lot of late nights, a lot of sleepless nights,
Yeah.
a lot of emotional, personal energy put into trying to figure out the best for the community, because there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of people not wanting to um, uh, not wanting to hear another person's perspective, or internalize why they should care about that lived experience. And at the end of the day, knowing that there were a lot of things we weren't in control of, especially because it happened at a time when we couldn't function freely, right? We weren't able to gather, we weren't able to, and people's psychology, everyone was already stressed to the breaking point. And then this on top of it, which for Indigenous people, they've always lived with, right?
Right.
But for other people who haven't had to face it, who haven't had to sort of look at it, because it hasn't been part of their lived experience, they're kind of going around going about their life, and you have a pandemic that has upended everything and changed everything about how you live pretty well. And then all of a sudden you're asked to now hold space and empathy and caring, and at the same time you're being challenged, and you might even feel like your very existence is being somehow questioned or disparaged
Yeah.
because of this. So it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And that is not the best psychological moment to be having such a profound and nuanced
Right. Because right. And what you're saying is the overlay of COVID, this on top of COVID. So COVID being the underlying issue that we're all trying to navigate through, changed our way that we communicate, our social interactions, over the internet versus in person, and just the people working from home, people working in the office. I mean, you change all those dynamics, and now you're trying to deal with such a significant issue, and you can't deal with it in the way you grew up dealing with issues. It's almost like you've added a new way of trying to deal with things, and you just got thrown the most significant, most difficult issue you could possibly have had to deal with.
Yeah. And so we really spent a lot of time, and I'm saying we because we all did.
Yeah.
Okay, how are we going to have this not just blow up and hurt more people? And so I think we, dealt the hand, we played the hand of cards we were dealt as well as we could.
I was just going to say, as well as you could, and I agree with that. And you know what? We all watched as you as a collective, a group went through this, and it just got me thinking. This is politics is the most public of activities, and you probably don't think about it until you're actually in the heat of it all. When you realize, you run, like I run my law practice, you run your farm. Those are private businesses. We do what we need to do, and no one is looking over our shoulder. And I don't read about it in the paper the next day about some steps that I took or didn't take. I mean, how did you find that, this whole private public scenario?
Well, I'd had a taste of that already, because with the advocacy piece,
Okay.
and with the, I'd had to deal with people who are irate. I mean, on the farm, so we're organic, right? We farm organically. We've been farming organically. My father-in-law took the farm back in Germany, organic, back in 1960. My uncle and my father-in-law were part of the very first group that created organic certification in North America back in the 80s. So we've been in it a long time. And there are people who feel threatened by that conversation about whether you farm organically or not.
Right.
And
Yes, I understand.
I don't go
Yes.
around beating people on the head about how they farm.
Right.
I really don't.
Yeah.
We choose to farm how we farm,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to, bash my neighbors.
Yes.
But when because there's this big, lot of rhetoric going back and forth about things, you become a flashpoint or a target,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
the temporary foreign worker program, the same. So I'd had to deal with online hate before, threats, So in a sense, being on council wasn't. It was just more of it.
Gotcha. But for someone who
But
didn't
it
have
wasn't
that
entirely.
experience, someone that wouldn't have had your prior experience, it would be a very significant change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
reminds me of this Japanese proverb. So when I was in business school in the 80s, and the Japanese business model was always something big, and I took a Japanese business sort of course, and they had a proverb because they always had this sort of uniformity thing going on in Japan, right? They all exercise together, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. And it was like the nail that sticks out gets hammered on the head. That was sort of the proverb. Okay, let me ask you a couple of things before we go. I just wanted to touch on tips for newly elected people. What are some of your thoughts there?
Read all the words. Literally read all the
Yeah.
words. Um, I didn't come up with that one. I clarify. That was something that was said to me by, and I don't remember who it was, but when I was first elected, one of the courses that um, I went on to try and make sure that I knew what I was doing and was going to be able to do a good job. Yeah, somebody said read all the words, and it's really good advice because the words you don't read can bite you
Right.
in the behind. That one little phrase you
Yeah, yeah,
didn't
yeah.
see.
You had mentioned something about going for training too. So
Yeah, so there's training offered. Usually, most municipalities put together some kind of an onboarding package for new and returning even counselors. Um, but there are some really great training opportunities with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and I would absolutely recommend highly that
a-
anyone, new or returning.
and how about getting to know staff? Is that important? Those interactions early.
Absolutely. Staff, again, go back to my comments about people being jittery when there's a new face at the horseshoe. They need to know who you are. They need to understand what you're asking when you're asking things so that they don't feel blindsided when you ask a question in chambers. They're not going, wait, whoa, where'd that come from? You know, they need to feel like that you're part of a team with them.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that they're running the show, but you need to respect what their role is and
Yes.
respect their
Right.
expertise.
Their expertise. Yeah.
Doesn't mean don't question it, just respect
Yeah,
it.
and I think that's fair to be able to question, right? You can have respectful conversations where you challenge on issues, and as long as the discussion is respectful and you're asking questions because you're also there on behalf of the taxpayers that voted you in, so you have to
Yeah.
be able to question things that might be of some concern. So yeah, I appreciate that very much. Okay, you ran for mayor then after your first term. Why did you run for mayor?
Biggest reason I couldn't do some of the things I realized I wanted to do for our community from the seat I was in.
I totally understand that. I said this to you the other day. I said there's like 12 key positions in the whole of Waterloo region, really, truly. And it's not to diminish counselors, but counselors themselves, individual counselors, are not one of those 12 unless they're on a certain committee. And it's like definitely the 7 mayors and the regional chair are 8 of those 12 key positions because so much of what gets done uh, is at the direction or the guidance or the following of what the interests are of the head of council.
Yeah. And it is true that, council as a whole holds the power. But in reality, if you're the one sitting in that mayor's seat and you're the one sitting in that office and you're full time and you're
Full
also
time,
in
yeah.
the you're sitting on regional council as well, you do hold more of the power. And from just a time perspective, I couldn't afford,
Right.
as a part-time counselor, I couldn't afford the time it would have taken me to do some of the work that I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I totally understand what you're saying, because I was a mayor and now I'm a counselor on regional council. I totally understand the two different dynamics between those two universes. Absolutely. Listen, Jenn, we're going to wrap it up there. I want to thank you for having taken the time for coming on the show, but also want to thank you for having, served the community in the capacity you did. You're still very young, so I have no doubt that you will continue to serve and use that great skill set that you've developed over the years to benefit Wilmot Township. So, listen, all the best, and we'll meet along the trail sometime.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Old Grey Mayors podcast. If you have any ideas for stories or people you would like us to interview or reach out to, please feel free to contact us. And thank you again.